Why without pauses? If you believe truth still matters, if you believe stories like this deserve to be told before they're buried, hit subscribe right now, because what happened inside a small roadside diner on an ordinary American night will change the way you see power, prejudice, and silence forever. And the people who tried to crush one family never imagined the man they were provoking had survived places most soldiers never returned from. The bell over the diner door jingled softly as the Williams family slid into a cracked vinyl booth under flickering fluorescent lights, the smell of burnt coffee and fried onions clinging to the air. Marcus Williams folding his broad shoulders inward out of habit, so he wouldn't brush strangers as he moved. A habit learned from years of trying to appear smaller than he was, less threatening, more acceptable, even though at 42, he carried the calm weight of a man who had walked through chaos and learned to master it. His wife Elaine setting down menus for their 2 kids, 16-year-old Jordan with his headphones hanging loose around his neck and 10-year-old Maya swinging her legs under the table. None of them knowing that this quiet moment, this simple late-night meal after a long drive, would become the axis on which their lives tilted, because 2 patrol cars idled outside with engines humming low, and inside the diner a pair of uniformed cops had already noticed them, eyes lingering a second too long, judgments forming silently, the kind that didn't need words, and Marcus felt it before it happened the way he always did. A tightening behind the eyes, a controlled breath through the nose, the internal switch from civilian father to something older and deeper. Though he stayed seated, smiling gently at Maya as she argued with Jordan over pancakes versus waffles, unaware that Officer Brent Harlow had leaned toward his partner and muttered something about suspicious, about people like that. Words soaked in assumption rather than fact, and when Harlow stood and walked over, boots heavy against the linoleum, Marcus watched the reflection in the window behind the cop's head instead of the badge itself, tracking movement, angles, exits, the waitress freezing mid-step nearby sensing tension she'd seen too many times, and Harlow's voice came out clipped and official as he asked for IDs, for reasons to be there, for explanations that no other family in that diner was being asked to provide. Elaine's hand tightening around her water glass, Jordan stiffening with the familiar anger of a young black man who had already learned the rules were never written for him, and Marcus spoke first, slow and even. "Is there a problem, officer?" Knowing tone mattered, knowing ego was the real weapon in the room, but Harlow ignored the question and told him to stand, and when Marcus hesitated for half a second, not in defiance but in calculation, Harlow's hand drifted closer to his holster, the room going quiet, forks hovering midair, and this was the first twist because the second cop, a younger woman named Reyes, noticed something off, not about the family but about Marcus, the way he shifted his weight, the way his eyes never darted but absorbed, the way his breathing never spiked, and she remembered her brother who had served overseas and come back different, controlled, contained, yet she said nothing as Harlow escalated, accusing, probing, pressing, until Jordan stood up despite his mother's whisper, "Sit down." And Harlow spun on him barking orders, hands on shoulders, pushing him back into the booth, and Marcus rose then. Slowly, palms open, voice still calm but lower now, telling Harlow to take his hands off his son. And in that moment every lesson Marcus had learned in deserts and mountains half a world away lined up behind his eyes. Every teammate lost, every civilian saved, every rule of engagement burned into muscle memory. And still he chose restraint, because this was America, because this was supposed to be home. But Harlow saw the size, saw the scars on Marcus's forearms peeking from under his sleeves, saw the quiet authority, and mistook it for defiance, twisting Marcus's arm behind his back, cuffs clicking too tight, Elaine crying out, Maya screaming, the diner erupting into chaos, phones coming out, and as Marcus was forced to his knees, he caught Reyes's eye and said softly, "Ma'am, you might want to slow this down." Not a threat, not a boast, just a fact. But it was too late as backup arrived and Marcus was hauled outside under flashing lights. And the second twist came when Harlow ran Marcus's ID and frowned. The computer lagging, then beeping again. Flags popping up not with warrants or priors but with a sealed federal notation that made Harlow's smile fade. Because it didn't say criminal, it said protected, and could process that. His radio crackled with a voice asking him to confirm the detention of one Chief Petty Officer Marcus Williams, retired United States Navy, and Harlow laughed nervously saying it must be a mistake. But the voice came back sharper, asking again, and the night shifted, because inside the diner Elaine was being questioned, treated like an accomplice instead of a wife, And Jordan clenched his fists, promising himself he'd never forget this feeling, while Maya sobbed into her mother's jacket, and outside Marcus knelt on cold asphalt staring at the stars, remembering nights on foreign soil when the sky looked the same and everything else was different. And the third twist unfolded when 3 unmarked SUVs rolled in silently, doors opening, men and women stepping out who did not look like cops. No swagger, no shouting, just presence, and Harlow's bravado collapsed as a man in a plain jacket approached, flashing credentials that outranked everyone there, telling Harlow to remove the cuffs immediately. And when Harlow hesitated, the man repeated himself without raising his voice, and Marcus stood free again, rubbing his wrists, nodding thanks not with gratitude but acknowledgement. And only then did the truth spill out in fragments, that Marcus had served 20 years as a Navy SEAL, that he had led teams through missions still classified, that he had pulled Americans out of places that no longer exist on maps, that his retirement had come quietly by design, that his name carried weight in rooms Harlow would never enter, and the diner crowd watched through the windows as the power dynamic inverted. The fourth twist landing when bodycam footage was reviewed on the spot, showing Harlow's words, his tone, his hands, his choices, and Reyes finally spoke up, voice shaking but firm, corroborating what she'd seen. And as supervisors arrived and whispers spread, Elaine and the kids were escorted outside, reunited with Marcus in a tight embrace that held fear, anger, and relief all at once. And Marcus whispered to Jordan that strength wasn't about striking back but knowing when you didn't have to. But the story didn't end there, because days later the footage went viral despite attempts to bury it. The town erupting in protest and debate. Harlow placed on leave, then charged. The department exposed. Reyes praised quietly, then sidelined. And Marcus found himself thrust into a spotlight he never wanted. Reporters asking why he hadn't said who he was sooner, and he answered honestly that it shouldn't matter, that his service didn't make him more deserving of dignity than any other black father taking his kids to dinner. And the final twist came months later when Marcus was invited to speak at a national conference on policing. Standing at a podium wearing a simple suit, scars hidden, voice steady, telling the room that real courage wasn't wearing a uniform or carrying a weapon. It was checking your assumptions, slowing down, seeing people as people, and somewhere in the audience Harlow sat in plain clothes, head bowed, finally understanding too late what Marcus had known all along, that power without discipline is just fear in disguise, and the bell over a diner door can change everything if you're listening. And if stories like this matter to you, if you want more truth, more accountability, and more voices that refuse to stay silent, don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might be even closer to home.